You know what? Look, I was reading a comment in my comment section the other day. One of it was like, Dylan, you don't give Trump a chance. You don't listen to his policies. You don't listen to, you know, just him trying to connect with people and explain to them, you know, his plan to get us out of this economic slump. And I was thinking, you know, maybe he has a point. Maybe I'm not listening to Donald Trump's beautiful, fantastic, huge policy proposals. And so Donald Trump spoke at the, it was the Economic Club of New York. The Economic Club of New York. And he was supposed to speak to all these businessmen and all these people who care about, say, the economy, about how he's going to revitalize the American economy and continue the growth that we've seen post-COVID, you know, keep America going good, maybe even improve it some. And I want to show you his response to a question that is about a specific policy. Now, I want you to remember the specific policy question that is asked here, and please look for the answer to the policy question. The question, not anything else, the question, which is asked because they want an answer. Check this out.
Mr. President. Hi, John.
First, let me thank you for your presentation today. President Trump, in the last fiscal year, the fiscal deficit under the Biden administration was approximately $2 trillion. Under the policies you've announced, the deficit would come down from items such as increased revenues from tariffs, as well as eliminating the tax incentives for the Green New Deal. These gains would be mitigated by decreases in revenues from policies such as no tax on tips. Overall, what do you estimate will be the impact of the fiscal deficit from your policies?
Do you think when he sat down and he wrote this question out, he was thinking, man, I can't wait for Donald Trump to tell me how he's going to balance the budget? Do you think that's what he was thinking? Or do you think he was like, God, I gotta throw something at him. I gotta give him something to swing at, right? I gotta ask him some question, right? We'll see how he answers this. We'll see how we make this about Honduras, okay? No, I'm just curious. But you heard his question, balancing the budget, managing the deficit. How will the deficit be affected by his administration, especially since he ran one of the largest deficits of any American president in history? I think like third place. I know Abraham Lincoln was ahead of him, but I think he had a good excuse.
Well, we just hit record highs at numbers that nobody ever thought possible. You're right, it's over $2 trillion. Nobody thought that was a number that was, I mean, you can go back 4 years, nobody thought a number like that would be possible. It's crazy. It's like, it's just horrible, actually. But yeah, we're $2 trillion, and I view it as profit and loss to a certain extent. A lot of people say, oh, it's trade. You know, you have many people say trade deficits don't matter. I think they matter a lot. We're going to have tremendous growth. What I'm talking about is all about growth. The taxes.
Mind you, what he's talking about, like, oh, like Biden rose the deficit. Trump put a lot more debt on America than Biden while he was president. I think almost like twice as much. He ran a big deficit. He ran a deficit larger than Biden. He doesn't talk about it because it's an uncomfortable fact, but when you do all those gigantic tax cuts and then you don't do anything to balance those out, and you say that growth is just going to take care of it, and then it doesn't, there is some growth, but it doesn't like make up the government revenues that you would have had if you had those taxes, then you get deficits. You get larger deficits. If you already have a deficit and then you cut taxes and then you don't do anything to make up for it, big surprise, you have a bigger deficit.
It's relatively minor.
It did also not help the government budget that we then went immediately into a global health crisis.
We're going to have tremendous growth. What I'm talking about is all about growth. The tax is relatively minor compared to the growth. We're going to make our money back on growth. We're going to also, we're going to grow like nobody's ever grown before. I think if this all works out, You're going to have the auto industry come back to America. Right now, China is building 2 auto factories in Mexico, massive auto factories.
How did we get to auto factories? We were talking about the deficit. We were talking about balancing the budget. Now we're talking about Chinese automobile factories. We're talking about the deficit. Now if he's going to talk about those businesses will be brought back to America, they will pay this much revenue, how is he going to bring this back around?
And they think they're going to make their cars in Mexico and send them back into the United States with no tax. It's not going to happen. Under this administration, it's going to happen. And they wanted to do that during my administration. I said, if you do it, we're going to put a 200% tariff on every car, and you'll never be able to see it. There will never be one car coming across our border. And if I would have let them do it, we would have had these 2 factories. Well, now they're building massive factories, more than 2, and they're going to kill Detroit. And the head of the union, the United Auto Workers in Detroit, has done a terrible, terrible job, just a terrible job. But we're going to bring tremendous growth back. And remember, we're also taking in a certain percentage. I won't name the percentage today, but it'll be a certain tariff percentage, which will be higher than people had heard in the past. And we will be bringing in billions and billions of dollars, which will directly reduce our deficits.
I mean, like, so tariff. He said he's going to tariff. He's going to tariff away our debt and our deficit. So he wants to increase the tax cuts he did before. He's already said that that's one of the things he wants to do. It's the only economic policy he's really talked about is tax cuts and more drilling. Not that the Biden administration hasn't been drilling. We're exporting more like natural gas and energy than ever before in American history. We're the #1 exporter in the world. But he wants to do that more, and tax cuts. But that question didn't have to do with those Chinese automobiles, or it didn't have to do with just the vague concept of growth, which he said will come back. And tariffs alone is not going to make up the deficit. And if you were to place tariffs, that would be significant enough to make up the deficit that we have right now in the United States. That cost is ultimately going to be passed down to the consumer. What is going to be happening, instead of putting a tax on Americans, you're just going to end up taxing the consumer for all the goods that come into the United States, and not even the goods that directly come into the United States as consumed by Americans, but the goods that come into the United States and then are put in American products, and then those people making those products now have to pay more for that good, like aluminum, steel. My grandfather used to do steel work. He was, worked in the steel mills in Ohio and left because of the Chinese steel. Why? Because the Chinese steel was cheaper. And now Americans are buying products made with cheaper steel. You institute a bunch of tariffs, maybe you can create a closed economy for the possibility of these companies coming back, but for the people who are going to be consuming in the short term, and even for like just the long-term added cost for the companies that have to rely on that product, prices will go up. And that will have a negative economic impact on consumers. So if you've just ended up taxing people in a different way, then I don't really see the success here. I definitely, when America is like the center of so much global trade, trying to be like, oh, we're going to put a tariff on everything when we're the center of global trade doesn't really make much sense. It'd be like the Swiss being like, you know what, how about we charge everyone, how about we make it like a 30% charge if you wanted to make a transaction in the bank. It seems not like the brightest move if you're the Swiss. Doesn't seem like the brightest move for the center of so much world trade to put a 10% tariff on literally every single good. If it was a strategic industry, if it was something for national defense, if it was something for, say, I don't know, to preserve, Americans' independence when it came to vital natural resources or technologies that we need to survive and in the event of, supply line crises, you could convince me maybe. You can maybe convince me about the need to create these closed markets. But you're not going to create a closed market for every single good. So what he's talking about is just a tax passed down to consumers that's going to be instead of tariff. And he said he's going to use this money to create a sovereign wealth fund, by the way. I don't know if you guys heard that. So how is he said this at a different time at the same conference. And this is what I would be thinking if I was in the audience, or if I had a brain cell, or if I was anybody in that room who asked any basic question. How are you, on one hand, going to eliminate the deficit using tariffs, which I don't know how you bring business back by say that way necessarily, enough to bring back the entirety of the deficit while also not destroying the American economy. And I don't even know if it's physically possible. But let's say it is physically possible to raise large sums of money this way without crashing the American economy. How are you both going to make a sovereign wealth fund with these funds and get rid of the deficit? Especially if Trump is also announcing that he's going to further cut taxes and he wants to invest more into the armed forces. When we talk about economics in this election, when we talk about money management, when we talk about fiscal responsibility, Trump is the favorite candidate because he's the businessman. He's the favorite candidate because he's the Republican, and that's supposed to be the party, quote unquote, of like business sense. But when you listen to any of his like economic philosophy, there's a reason why he went into the White House in 2016 saying he was going to get rid of the debt and left it with the largest deficit of any peacetime president basically ever. That to me does not seem like the skill of a good businessman, or if it is the skills of a businessman, it's not one that is running the country correctly. It's not one running the business. This is not his type of business. Maybe he can run a casino. Well, maybe not a casino, or maybe he can run like a steak company or not a steak company. You know, maybe clothing line. Not the clothing lines either. Maybe he can run a hotel. But that doesn't necessarily translate into running the most powerful country in the world with interconnected trade networks everywhere and anywhere you can find human beings that have green. So, to me, it doesn't surprise me that much that Kamala Harris has so quickly made up the gap with Trump when it comes to polling on the economy. I don't know if you guys saw this, but if you polled Biden and Trump on the economy, they did Biden did terribly. But if you do Trump v. Kamala economy, we had some recent stories coming out that had Kamala Harris just down, I think, 3 points on the economy. I saw that with the Associated Press. I can't find the numbers right now. I wonder if there's let me do polling, because this is just like doing the issues. Here we are. Trump's edge over Harris on economy, crime slips. Here it is. The 3-day poll conducted August 23rd to 25th showed Republican former President Donald Trump's approach to the economy and employment was forward 43% compared to 40% to Harris's approach. That still has Harris behind 3 points, even though it's pretty close to the margin of error. It is within the margin of error because the margin of error is 4 points. But also, let me just throw out there, the gap before was like double digits. So Harris has made big inroads. And if this is the type of like economic speeches they're putting out there, not a surprise.
Wizard got a tier 2 subscription.
Hey, thank you so much for the tier 2 sub, Cheese Wizard. Thank you.